Good morning, John.
Hi, Tom.
How are you today?
I am well. And
Good.
yourself?
I am well too.
So the Friday Five has become the We Three for today.
Well, I got Ned's message. Who else?
I thought Ferrick said that he had guests.
Oh, I
coming.
think you're right. So it is we three. But we're not Kings of Orient.
Well, my heart goes out to Shavira. He's such a family man, and I think he and Darlene reach out when troubles come.
Yeah, I guess so.
I'm gonna turn up the sound a little bit.
Okay, I can hear you fine.
Good, okay. It was the adjustment on my laptop that made the difference.
Good. Okay, so Jorge Ladrone is the only one we're waiting for. Good. Did you ever make contact with John Weitzel? Well, you did. You joined the seminary.
OLQA,
Yeah.
yes, I did. And I showed off a little bit that there was I think they screen people. They want to know what year, who were the rectors, who were your classmates, and so forth.
Uh-huh.
And so I showed off a little bit and listed all 32 of us of our senior high school class, because that's one of the things I committed to memory that year.
Well, yeah, I'd be interested. I'm sure I remember probably a good half of them, but are you in
I
touch?
will send, if you'd like, I'll send you the Excel sheet that I created when we had that reunion at Ted Howard's place.
Well,
And-
yeah, I still have at least the version of it that was contemporary to that reunion. I think you sent me a revised version a few months later.
Every now and then I'll get something like yesterday. I had tried to call Jerry Angersani and the number was disconnected. Well, they no longer have a landline. And so I sent him an email, and sure enough, he called me back and gave me the cell. He doesn't want to be pulled in too much. I think I've shared that, haven't I?
I don't know, you may have.
There's just a certain privacy that he has. Like when I invited biographical responses for that reunion at Ted Howard's place, and he just said, no, thanks. I'm on to the rest of my life, and I'd rather not get drawn too much in.
Yeah, well,
On the other
I
hand,
think we can not only appreciate that, but to a certain extent identify with it, because
we need limits, that's for sure.
Yeah, that is for sure.
While we wait for George, I don't know if you want to place a call or anything, but today is the Feast of the Sacred Heart. And reading and reflecting, I got curious about all of what they talked about was the water around Jerusalem and the temple. And there's some fascinating research about all the canals and
the various waterworks done by the various kings.
Yes.
Ezekiel has,
and how much ceremonial washing they did.
Oh yeah, I'm getting more and more familiar with that. I mean, mikvot, as
we've got mixed books. Yeah, yep.
Mikvot are turning up all over the place. the ceremonial washings, and the fact that those water jars had to be stone. In fact, a very fascinating book that I'm reading right now, one of the chapters he's devoting to his own he's a journalist, German journalist, and I forget his name, Michael Hesemann. But he has visited most of the active archaeological sites having to do with both Jesus and Mary, and has written a fascinating account of the lives of Jesus and Mary from what's been interesting to me, a Jewish perspective, but what we can learn from the archaeology. He devotes a whole chapter to the place called Sepphoris, which I'm very intrigued by. And this one chapter he has regarding Cana, that there is another site that is not very accessible and has been somewhat excavated some miles distant. I didn't check the map as to just to get the directions, but it's not easily accessible. It's off the beaten tourist track, but that probably has a better claim to actually being that Cana than the place where everybody renews their marriage vows. And of course,
you mentioned Sephora. That was the largest sort of educated community near Nazareth. Is that right?
well, not quite that. It was a thriving, largely Jewish, but Greek influenced city that was built. It had been, Fred Lawrence has come in. Well, he will have. But Sepphoris has been built. There he is. Hello, Fred.
Hi, Fred.
We see a beautiful view of your ceiling and your forehead.
Can you see how you come up on our screen? There we go.
There you go. Okay. Hi, Fred.
Well done.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Good morning, you guys.
So we were just talking about the Jewish Jesus and some of the research, archaeology especially, that has shed a lot of light on the early life of Jesus, and of course the places where his events occurred and where the apostles came from, and events of Mary's life too, and so on. And one of the things I was just sharing with John was a journalist, a German journalist, Catholic journalist named Michael Hesemann, has written two books of his own, from a journalist's perspective, not a professional archaeologist's perspective, but his own pursuit of the various locations and active archaeological sites and what's being written about them, and the various archaeologists who are doing that and so on. And basically, one of the things that we were talking about is a lot of examples are being unearthed about those stone water jars that, for purification purposes, they had to be stone, not pottery, because stone was incapable of being rendered impure. So you had to have pure water, which could either be living, flowing water, or if it was stored at all, it had to be in a stone jar rather than a pottery.
Yep.
and the prevalence of mikvot, plural of mikvah, in many of those communities. And we were just also discussing a little bit about Sepphoris, which is 4 miles from Nazareth and was actually being constructed at the time of Jesus' youth by George Crook is Coming, by Herod Antipas. Hello,
Hey,
George.
George. Welcome.
And it, it's almost inconceivable to me that Joseph, the skilled building constructor, which is what tekton means, would not have been employed there. And as Jesus was growing up, it's very likely that he would have been employed there too, because there was in a city with a very active and well-financed building program, their skills would be highly desirable.
And closer to the trade route, I'm guessing.
Yeah. And, the other thing is 4 miles from Nazareth means that to walk there would take an hour or less because, obviously, if you were being paid by the hour or whatever their contract working was, they wouldn't be dawdling on the way. So they were probably rushing to work because their pay didn't start until they got there to work. And so that would be less than an hour's commute, which is better than we do in LA. So anyway,
how about Boston? That too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the that does remind me of the story that I can't resist repeating, that everybody in LA lives a half hour from the beach, an hour from the mountains, and 2 hours from work.
Very often true, that's for sure.
Tom, would devout Jews have been permitted to work on a Roman building project?
Well, let's remember that Herod Antipas did everything that he could to appear Jewish, just like his father, Herod the Great. And the indications are, the archaeological indications from, archaeologists love to dig through people's
Theorize.
But the one thing that they discovered in this period in Sepphoris apparently is that there are no pig bones.
Oh,
So that would indicate because everybody else loved pork, but that would indicate that there was a predominantly Jewish population, which also kind of means, and I think this is an interesting inference, that Jesus not only was literate, but that he would also be pretty familiar with Roman Greek culture, as well as architecture. And they make a big point often about a lot of his language, including one of his favorite words for describing his enemies, hypocrites. That's a theater term. It basically meant an actor. And one who puts on a mask and plays a role. So there's some interesting connections that shed a little bit more light, including that very fascinating one that we just heard in the Daily Gospel about the city on the hill cannot be hidden. Well, Sepphoris was built on a hill, being built 4 miles away from Jerusalem, from Nazareth, on a hill. It was, that gave him the image to use in that parable. Now, I don't want to make too much of that, but it's interesting, I think, to speculate into. There's a lot that we can infer about what otherwise we call the hidden life of Jesus, including,
especially age 12 to age 30.
yeah. And of course, we know nothing from his infancy to age 12, except in a few apocryphal infancy gospels where he, gets in a spat with a fellow kid and strikes him dead. And the father, the kid's father gets angry with Joseph because, well, look what your kid did. I think he raised him to life subsequently, but if I remember rightly,
I would hope so, yeah.
I haven't been too close to those apocryphal gospels.
It's to your credit. Ned keeps telling me I got to read the apocryphal gospel I can't think of the name of James, that tells us the name of Jesus's Mary's parents and how she was raised in the temple. And
Yeah.
To me, well, unless Ned's opinions that it's worthwhile to read are corroborated by Tom or Fred or Phil Berryman or somebody that has studied this stuff, I ain't gonna do it.
Yeah.
And let's face it, every day we've got scriptures that have so much to offer us day to day. And look at what we've got today. Tom Welbers, I mean, you did homilies very seriously on the scriptures of the day, right?
Right. Right.
So I'm kind of with you, George. I don't need more. I've got plenty to work with.
Yeah.
Well, Ned thinks my Marian piety is deficient, which it is. Well, depending on your criteria, I guess. He has me reading this book by, I can't think of his name, Brant Petrie.
Oh,
and he's drawing all these interpretations of the importance of Mary. She's the Ark of the Covenant because the original Ark disappeared, but God dwelled in it. Therefore, Mary is the Ark of the Covenant. It strikes me as pretty nonsensical, but he's distilling the fathers. I see Fred chuckling.
Well, to a certain extent, George, that brings us back to recognizing at what level of discernment or spiritual development or perception is the one we're dealing with. And that's where I'm fascinated by what Tom Welbers has always been challenged with on campus ministry as well as parish work, the amazing arc of perceptions and readiness that your audience had, right?
that's been interesting. Yeah. I've always tried to, I've fancied myself much more as a communicator and maybe a translator, not translating from one language to another, but translating theological concepts from the realm of academia into the language that real people can find meaningful.
Right.
Ned and I had dinner with Father Rausch.
Oh, yeah.
Loyola on Monday. And Rausch, not this time, but when I last saw him, he told me that today's students, undergraduates, I guess, have no intellectual curiosity. And it's driving him crazy, with frustration. I wonder, Fred, have you found that to be true?
No,
Good.
but
I'm delighted to hear that.
their intellectual curiosity is really connected to their ambitions. So the parents usually send their kids. They think they pretend to send them for something, but they always tell the people in the first year experience, is my kid going to get a good job? And
Mhm.
that's what they're pretty much that orients their intellectual curiosity. It's pretty pragmatic. Uh, so you have to do what Tom was talking about. Interestingly enough, Lonergan had an idea about theology as functionally specialized. So you have research, interpretation, history, which it sounds like Tom is well versed at, dialectics, conversion or foundations, dogmatics, the systematics, and then the last one is communication.
Mm.
Lonergan always said that's the hardest one. And it sounds like John was saying that Tom is terrific at that. And so I would say less a translator than a communicator.
Ah,
Uh,
I have to modify that. I do have to say there is always one question lurking behind anything that I have said or less frequently written for anybody else. And that is the question, the most profound question in life is, so what?
Mhm.
Who cares?
Yeah, Jesus.
In some
Jesus
ways,
is
I
Jesus
have
is
to
the incarnate God. Well,
yeah,
so
yeah.
what's that mean to
Well,
me?
I've always felt in some ways I've got to address that who cares question, or else I'm beating the wind.
yeah.
So that's been my attempt, and that's one reason why, well, I still want to keep doing that.
if I may, when I read much of what George Farrick sent us, Fred, that the feedback was very much from one-on-one interactions that you had with graduate students who did care, and that you were able to hear from them. So what in their life?
Yeah.
Is that ring?
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah,
So you didn't really have to ask that question in teaching them. They
right.
care. Of
Well,
course, there are grad students who don't really care.
Yeah.
then why are there graduate students in theology if they don't care?
Yeah. Well, it's an idea of a career.
Mhm.
But you've had a lot of contacts with priests who maybe never ask themselves whether they care, really.
Oh yeah.
So you have those whose mother had their vocation for them
Mm-hmm.
and things like that.
You know, the Jerry Fallon was the archetypical case of that. He told me a story that his mom had come over to visit him in Rome. And he said to her, you know, Mom, I don't believe in God anymore. And his mother said, oh, Jerry, don't worry about it. You know, nobody's going to know. Just keep doing what you're doing. Be my son, the priest, you know. He also told me a story. There was this delightful IHM nun who is now deceased, but Socorro Mesa. And she joined the dispensed group.
Mhm.
And I met her. She was supervising a English as a second language program for the LAUSD, and I was teaching at it at night when I went through law school. And the IHMs that went out had to make a living now, in that community, and so that and contribute to the common good, etc. But she had been the superior of the IHM convent in Temple City, I think it was. I think Jerry was there. And he said, one day he was saying mass for the sisters in their convent, and he said, at the end of it, he's, "Oh, sisters, I have to confess, I just feel like such a fraud. Here I am saying mass, and I don't believe in it one bit." So Coral said to him, "Well, Jerry, that's very interesting, and I'm sure we'd all love to talk to you about it someday. But the sisters and I got to get over to our classrooms, and so why don't we put that on hold?" And he said, "And George, I was so deflated here. I thought this was the greatest announcement since Luther nailed his thesis up, allegedly. And it was like, yeah, but we got to, do our thing for God." I don't know if he ended up in that state of atheism or not. If he did, he was certainly a Catholic fellow traveler.
So he said that to them before he started the mass rather than after.
No, the way I remember it, it was at the end.
Oh, well, then they already got the mass. So okay.
No.
I could just see the old nun saying, that doesn't make any difference to us. Let's get with it. We've got other things to do.
We need the real presence. Get on.
And we get ex opere operato, even if you don't, pendejo.
That's right.
She lived a very long life, and last time I talked to her was at some dinner, and she had become a registered masseuse in her 80s. And she was talking about, well, a lot of these sisters are getting old now and they've got their aches and pains. And so I'm performing a good deed here. And she lived down on Kingsley. And while she was talking, her hands unconsciously started making masseuse type movements, I mean, like, if somebody's back goes out, I mean, I'm really helpful. And, and it was just the cutest thing.
Another vocation, George.
Yeah, well, I wish she were around now. She could work on my back.
Well, and massage does its best work on your back with your elbow.
I guess, I don't know.
Yeah. That's what they say. I have not. Well, you can't without a mirror. You can't watch them working on your back. But
yeah.
But sometimes what they're doing feels like it's their elbow.
Yeah.
Fred, before I forget, I've been meaning to send you an email on this all week, but here you are, so I don't have to do that. Last week, you told a story that you had talked to Cardinal Manning about your desire to teach when you were in Rome, and I guess you were, by inference, was you were asking him, is that something I could do as a priest of the archdiocese? And he had said, Fred, you should come back and be a humble parish priest. And it made me think of something I read once, and I don't know where I read it, but he was asked to give the invocation for a meeting of some association of theologians that was being convened in LA. So, and he was at lunch and he was supposed to give the benediction or whatever it was. And he said something, and I'm paraphrasing like this, Almighty God, as he used to say it. I'm welcoming the Association of Theologians today, and my prayer is that they leave us undisturbed in the faith we learned at our mother's knee. Amen. And that was his prayer. Doesn't sound like a positive attitude to me.
Well, Jerry
No.
certainly didn't follow that advice.
Pardon me?
Jerry didn't follow that advice.
No.
No, he didn't.
But I
Well,
think
on the other hand, Manning at least did not make it his life's mission to burn heretics. He may
Well,
have
that's
wanted to
something.
remain undisturbed in the faith he learned from his mother's knee, but at very least, when push came to shove, he was a breath of fresh air after McIntyre.
Oh, sure.
And did he not cut the ties with the secretary, with Hawks?
Well,
Not really.
he moved
No?
him. He moved him. I think he moved Hawks basically from out of any kind of clergy personnel management. So he made Rawdon, Archie Rawdon, his vicar general, to do that.
Oh,
Yeah, and Archie, I don't think had a truthful bone in his body, but
sad.
but he was a nice.
But
people.
Hawks had been formed in the financial, economic, and real estate field
Right.
anyway, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So he kept him in control of the, the story is often told, he kept him in control of the purse strings, which meant if you approached Manning with some kind of an idea that this would be a good ministry to do and needed some kind of funding for it, Manning would invariably say, that's a wonderful idea, that has my full approval. Now go see Monsignor Hawks to work out the details, which meant it would never happen.
Rawdon, when Cardinal McIntyre came to Rome, Rawdon was his chauffeur. Who ordained you guys?
McIntyre.
Oh, still.
Yeah.
When did he go?
I think the guys in the class after us were still ordained by McIntyre, and then the class of 1970, I think they were ordained by Manning. I think he retired in 1970. Now, I think there was a year's coadjutor. I don't know if it was a full year, but there was a certain time of where Manning was a coadjutor, and then he took over. And I don't remember the exact chronology of that.
It was right around the time of Católicos por la Raza. I remember I went to see Manning when he was coadjutor, and pleaded with him not to write off the protest in the Chicano community, and to listen to what Católicos por la Raza was trying to say. And it was a very interesting evening. He was at residence at, I think, St. Brendan's. I must say, he did listen to me. I mean, he was attentive as all get out, and told me all about his relationship with Cesar Chavez up in Fresno, as a sign, that he was open to stuff. And I think my recollection is he then offered me a ride home. I mean, it can't be, but he said, now when I was leaving, he said, now, George, you brought your car, did you? You know, and what was I going to say? No, Archbishop, I walked, from Pico Rivera to St. Brendan's, and I said, yes, I did. Thank you very much,
Mhm.
Nice.
Oh my-
But
I'm gonna switch just a second. Tom, would you remember a Marist who also did campus ministry, Father Dennis Stike?
Oh, yeah, very well.
So Denny tells a story that he had to deal with hawks on some of the real estate issues and the funding for campus ministry. And so Denny Stike, recognized how much hawks loved gardening and roses in particular. So Denny went out of his way and bought a couple of very nice rose cuttings or plants. And then within a short time, he had need of a lot of furnishings for one of the campus ministry sites. Well, Hawks opened up and said, well, here's a cloister or a religious order of women or someplace that's closing down. Go on over there and take whatever you need. But that happened once you were in that inner circle with Hawks, I think.
Yeah. And of course, Hawks was in a position to micromanage every single archdiocesan institution. From stuff like this convent is closing down, or this group of religious are coming in and looking for a ministry or whatever, down to the color of paint in each room of every single rectory. It was, and of course, every single automobile.
Yep.
It had to
It
be
was in his blood.
an Oldsmobile purchased from what was it, the people downtown. Anyway, from that crowd. Fred, I wanted to ask you another little chronological question. My recollection is that Manning pulled the plug on sending theology seminarians to Rome, to the North American College. I'm not too sure if my class, our class, with
Frank Lyons.
Frank Lyons and George Farrick,
Yep.
I was sent two, as I remember. I'm not sure if they were the last ones or if the next class, if there was anybody from that class who went.
That would have been ordination class of 69, Fred.
69, yeah.
Yeah.
Because when I went there as a priest student in 1972, there were no longer any Los Angeles seminarians at North American College, at NAC. And I don't know if they ever started sending seminarians there subsequently. I think Manning was very much opposed to it. Do you have any
I
insight
don't
on
know.
that,
I
Fred?
just don't remember. But
Yeah.
I do know that it seems to me that our class just before yours was a kind of watershed that a tremendous number of people who were there for the council
Mm-hmm.
were priests who ended up leaving the priesthood.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that might have been something that he was trying to
Yeah.
avoid,
Yeah,
event if
I
you did
I
that,
think I
which
think
I
I had,
suppose he did.
yeah, I don't know. Nobody from our class who went there, Lyons or Farrick, stayed too long in the priesthood.
Well, Frank wasn't ordained.
No,
No,
he was not.
Oh, Frank Lyons wasn't, okay, so that's, well, then I could see Manning saying, well, we wasted our money on him.
Why didn't they recognize what they were doing with the junior seminary sooner?
Yeah,
Oh,
You know,
well, he would have thought he wasted his money.
yeah. Although it seems like the junior seminary has produced some absolutely outstanding non-ordained uh, Catholics.
yes.
John
And-
Grimmer,
Yeah,
Ned Shavira,
right.
Yeah,
um,
Even George
I
Crook.
think,
Even,
I think I would think that the people who run the seminary understand that if they're not going to be ordained, they're going to be great
Hmm.
lay people.
Hmm.
That would be a useful thing for the seminary to do.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think that's just true. I meet them all the time from different seminaries.
Yeah,
Uh, just salt of the earth people.
yeah. And then I've been somewhat in contact with, and John is now, with a group of Queen of Angels alumni that are from after our time, younger than we are.
Yeah.
And and there's what, something like 300 or so in that group.
it's over 400.
I didn't even
Yeah.
know about, really?
Yeah,
OLQA, isn't it, Tom?
yeah. OLQA alumni, I think, or something like a
Yeah.
group on Facebook.
Really?
On Facebook.
Great stories. Even just the few days that I've been connected. It's a worthy connection, I think,
Yeah.
and really validates what you were saying, Fred and George, that there are some wonderful lay Catholics
Hmm.
who are products of that.
Yeah, interesting. John Weitzel, who's one of the organizers of that, was one of the leaders in the Newman Center at Cal State Long Beach when I was there. And so we've kind of marginally stayed in touch, but he became a teacher and also a character actor at Disneyland and a number of other things. And now he's pursuing a D-Min, I think. So
Loyola, where would he be?
I think it's Loyola. I'm not
I
sure.
think so.
You know, that one would hope it would be that way,
One
that,
would hope.
Fred, do you think that the archdiocese losing interest in sending people to Rome could have been, at least in part, based on the fact the chancellery didn't like the way you guys were turning out? It was such a time of ferment in the church, and I don't know what happened to Pat Malloy. Oh, Pat Malloy stayed here, right? He didn't go to Rome. It was Fred and Shelburne from that class.
Larry Shelburne, yeah.
Yeah. But Burr and everybody, were there any priests of that generation who went to Rome, were ordained, and then came back here, and Manning's words to you were, simple, humble priests for the rest of their lives? Or
Well, Larry left,
I know he did.
and he would have been one, but he'd be scandalized by scandal.
Mhm.
Yes.
And then he was a probation officer, I think. And I think he did that in a vocational way.
Yeah. Um,
I think one of the problems is that I think the LA diocese, they they were afraid of. It seems to me often, in my memory, we got warned about intellectual pride,
Mhm.
and there was a certain way of suggesting or hinting or getting at the notion that don't ask too many questions. Um, and I think that was that was a bad thing.
Mhm.
So like, there's no question that Jerry Fallon was really a great Christian man, and in Rome, well, first of all, the whole setup in Rome um, is so strange. So the American bishops, anytime some command came out from Rome, uh, the Irish and German bishops would all obey whatever it was. But in Rome, they didn't give a damn.
Yeah.
you're talking about the Italians.
Yeah, well, not just Italians, no.
Well, you know, Fred, that certainly when I was there, and I'm sure it's been here, the reason there were two reasons why the Roman Church, the Vatican, loved the American Church. One of which was, of course, they got money from them. The other one was that when Rome said something, the American bishops obeyed.
Yeah, yeah,
They took it seriously.
yeah. Well, I remember the summer before or the spring before I went to Rome. There was an article in Time magazine, which I once was addicted to, which was talking about bureaucracies in the world, which were the most efficient. And GM came in first, and Roman Catholic Church came in second.
Hmm.
And that,
Efficiency.
yeah, well, power too.
Uh-huh.
And so I think, and I mean, I don't know how many times we were told, and I suppose you were too, almost saying, well, the church is not a democracy.
Yep.
That
And the thought crosses my mind, looking back, not that many of our CMs were really that bright. A few were, but I think the clergy were being protected by the hierarchy.
yeah, but there certainly were really. You guys already know. You talk about Bill Barry and people like that. That they had minds and used them.
Yeah. Louis Friend certainly did.
And also hearts.
Also,
So,
who?
Hearts,
Yes.
nines, and
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
if you
Yeah.
got that combination, you were really in contact with them. It was edifying as could be.
True.
Fred, do you remember Father Franz?
No.
Yeah, I don't know to what
He might have
degree.
been the dean 1 year, just your
Well-
senior year.
No, he would have been the dean of the college your junior year, because that was the year, because we did our first year college down in San Fernando, John.
Right.
And then they were building the college, so we came back late in I guess it was
62.
61, I think, maybe.
One, and we
Yeah.
had an
Oh.
extremely wet
Oh,
year.
remember that up and down the hill?
Yeah, down to walking down, yeah. Well, anyway, Father Franz was dean then, and so that would have been your junior year, and then your fourth year, I guess he was still dean, yeah. Later, they made him the rector of the college, and then later than that, they made him the rector of the whole shooting match.
That's right.
And he was just despised by the people behind us because, like the good Vincentian he was, you know, he figured obedience and prudence are the primary virtues, and he obeyed the cardinal. But Ned and I had gotten close to him, and he and I became friends. He performed my first marriage. And so we went and visited him down in New Orleans in 2016, and he died the following year. But he, wow, he despised McIntyre. He really did, John. I mean, I told you this, right?
Yep.
He despised him. He thought he was a racist. And he in a conversation once, McIntyre said, "I just don't understand. What is it the darkies want?" That was about 1965, in the year of the Rumsfeld Act and so forth. But where I'm going with this is that he told Ned and me that the cardinal was leaning all over the Vincentians. Richardson was their provincial, to carve out a Los Angeles province of the Vincentians so that these guys would be educated for future seminary work, not in places like DePaul University or you know,
John,
the Midwest, where there were, you know, bastion of Catholic liberalism, but he could control their education.
wow.
And nobody knows that, I think, except me, you guys, and Father, what's his name? Stafford Poole died recently. So he was the Vincentian historian, right? So I wonder who even knows that fact. He gave me Father Franz, a bunch of his papers, and they're interesting reading. You know, he's writing to Father Richardson and saying, "Met with the cardinal again. I can't figure out what he's saying," and stuff like that, you know. It was just bizarre. The cardinal kept saying, "I want to walk into the chapel and see all the hymnals opened at the same page in the pews, like at West Point." And Father Franz said, "Oh, what do I know about West Point?" You know.
Right.
But he finally told the Vincentians, he had a 6-year term, and after 4 years, he said, "I can't stand this. I'm out of here."
Wow.
So, you know,
Did he go to
those
prison?
guys behind us all to this day hate his guts as the martinet of McIntyre and Hawks, you know?
What a perception. Yeah.
When I went back to Rome, for I don't know which reason, from the States, the general of the Vincentians was a guy from the East Coast named Maloney, Bob Maloney, and he put us up at the Vincentian Generalate, and he I don't see how he could have ever lived under the McIntyre regime. He was just a salt of the earth guy, and so I remember a talk. Maybe you were there for it, wherever it occurred, about a talk about what the church was like, and what it was like. This was the metaphor or the comparison was AT&T. And it worked out nicely because if you got a phone, you got it from AT&T, which was like the sacramental system of the church. And of course, if you got a phone book, you also got it from the church. And so this wonderful bureaucratic structure of AT&T, Ma Bell, as they called it in those days, was the perfect analog for the church. And I must say, I found it. I found that talk less than inspiring. It didn't have much to do with Lumen Gentium. I'll tell you.
And that was at St. John's, right?
Yeah,
The tar-
Keneally was his name.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Oh, he was giving it, not the cardinal.
yeah.
Keneally was.
No, it was Keneally. Yeah. So, but back to Hawks for a minute. Hawks came to Rome, and we were all called to. The LA guys were all called down to meet him, and we went into a kind of place where they were going to have a kind of a banquet, because he brought a lot of, all the people he brought with him were lay people, CEOs of different organizations and so forth. And I don't know why he wanted us to meet them, but we did. And an awful lot of their conversation was about the war that was going on at that time, and how people were using all kinds of excuses not to go to it. I remember very quickly, Pat Zeman's brother, Joe, was drafted. And he went right away. And I suppose if I had been not in the seminary, I would have gone if I were drafted. Actually, by the time I did get my draft letter, I already had heart problems, and so I was told to stay home. I was in Switzerland at the time, actually, so they let me stay, but I would have just gone. Like I had two stepfathers, and one entered. The first one died, and he died from a wound in the Pacific, diving under a jeep to avoid Japanese strafing on an island in the Pacific. And the other one, the second one, they were both roughly at the same age, but one died and the other was still alive. But he was in the European thing, and both of them had this in common, that they were so patriotic that they lied about their age in order to get in the service. So this is a weird thing of George was saying what a strange time that was, because one of the aspects that stood out to me were the number of people who used conscientious objection in order not to go to the war, and didn't have any conscientious objection whatsoever. They only wanted to get out of going to the war.
mhm.
What a different idea. I have a friend here in the faculty who was a late vocation
But
to
the
the
two wars were very, very different.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
true.
that's true. That's true. Good point.
But the cultures were very different too.
Yeah.
So this guy, he's a little old, he's older than me. He was a late vocation, a Jesuit. And he said when he got his draft letter, his father opened up the thing and saw what it was. And the first thing he said to him is, "You're going," which he did. But that was the generation difference.
Yeah.
Uh,
Surely, yep.
so you could see why conservative people like Manning and Manning is incomparable to McIntyre, I believe. I thought he
Yeah.
I thought he was a really holy, good person. Um, he certainly was. I thought he was a wonderful preacher.
Hmm.
Um,
Very eloquent.
yeah, and had great ideas about uh, the metaphors and things that he would use because he liked literature and so
Mhm.
forth. Um, but anyway, that meeting with Hawks really had a bad effect on me. Uh, and really what they were there, of course, to bring money. They would go to a papal mass, and as people did, uh, who got to go to the personal mass, many of them were big donors, and
Hmm.
that's what they were there to do. And Hawks accompanied them and probably solicited the money for the Pope, uh, John Paul II at that time. So um, it is a hard, this thing of the generations is really amazing. What a different climate of opinion we were all brought up in, as opposed to our parents and
Hmm.
forebears.
Yep.
Um, there were a lot of wonderful things about it, of course, about that time, of course, but it was really wild, and you could see why conservatives would be worried.
Oh, yeah.
And it would be the thing that I suppose they wanted to send to Rome people they considered bright, intelligent, and they,
Hmm.
of course, would be more liable to um, uh, learn in Rome that when in Rome, do as the Romans do, but when you go back to LA, you're not going to be able to act that way again. So, but still,
The
uh,
Romans were not known for towing the line. You come back to LA, you got to toe the line.
this is true, and that would have been a reason not to send people to Rome.
That could very well have been. They suddenly realized. Yeah. Fred, I have a little apology to make because I'm just looking at a couple of emails that came in just after we started, and you apparently tried the link maybe to the YouTube video, but you finally did get on this one, but you were having a little distress there for a moment.
Yes, I was. But
I'm glad you made it.
then thank you. Then I went back to your place there and I pushed another thing, which might have been, it
Ah,
was the link because here I am.
and there you are. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a very hard time getting on this morning, Tom. It took me about 15 minutes. I had to shut off my iPad and recharge it and all that stuff.
Oh my.
Yeah.
I know this is a little bit of a tangent, but Fred, you might enjoy this. When Frank Lyons left Rome, he and I shared an apartment together, and he taught at that, back in those days, it was Marymount Palos Verdes. And I taught at St. Bernard High School in Playa del Rey. And we both got draft notices. I was a full-time teacher and I got deferred. He was only part-time and he was not deferred. So he joined the Air Force and became a pilot and was such a good pilot that they let him choose whatever aspect, and he chose multi-engine transports. And so all through his time in the Air Force, he flew above and away from all the rockets and bullets and such. And then he came back and married one of his students, Barbara von Earth, one of his students from there, and moved to New York, had married into extremely wealthy shipping insurance family, and I haven't heard from him since.
Frank Lyons and I happened to be at the American Express. I can't remember what the reason was, but two fellows were there, American guys who had bought pretty nice little motorcycles, and they wanted to sell them for a very, very relatively reasonable price. So Frank and I both bought one, and we had a month or so off to travel wherever we wanted to. And we traveled down the Gold Coast into Spain. I remember.
I think Fallon did the same thing, did he not?
Who?
Jerry Fallon,
Did
I
he?
think, did the same thing.
Yeah, he had a motor scooter. Yeah.
Ah,
I didn't know where he traveled, but I did it with Frank, and he was really a wonderful companion.
good guy.
When we got to Madrid, we stopped at some kind of bakery, and I ate some cream puff or something like that, and I got horrible diarrhea. And Frank helped me wash my pants in the river, and then we went together, and he found a convent where the nuns would take me in, which they did, and give me shots that helped me recover.
Mm.
And it was so nice, but he was so faithful and good, helpful to me. But he was always a wonderful companion.
And a good classmate for us, don't you think, George and Tom?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like Frank. I don't think he was easily knowable in any depths. Do you, John and Tom?
I don't
there
think
was a
we
lot
were
of-
ever close. It was a friendly basis, but I wouldn't say we were close friends.
Yeah, I just don't think he was. I don't know. I mean, I wasn't close to him either, but I don't think he wanted to be close to people.
Well, and I think
I
he
was-
came, I think he came from a somewhat elitist family. As I think you guys know, he auditioned for what was Disney's TV show,
The Mouseketeer?
Mouseketeers, and he played the drums enough that he could have been the drummer on the Mouseketeers. But according to my memory, he chose to go to the seminary rather than to pursue that. But then I got to know his sisters and brother-in-law, and they were just a little bit a cut above the rest of us, if you know what I mean.
Economically.
Yeah.
Frank was good fun. I must say he was enjoyable, you know.
And a good seminarian. I mean, a really good seminarian, I think.
Yeah, best seminarian I knew was Pat Zeman.
Oops.
At least so I thought.
Yeah.
I did too.
Yeah, isn't that something?
I was shocked.
One of the things that jumps out of Ted Howard's book, Our Seminary Years, was Ted was very, very close to Barney Gatlin and to Pat Zeman. And he's still to this day disillusioned by the fact that Barney couldn't care less about their friendship and Zeman went the way he did. And so, Fred, if you're not aware, there is probably 10 pages in this book of 170 pages listing verified abusers. Right, George and Tom?
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't read.
George
Ted's-
has entered the waiting room.
George Ferrick,
It
hello.
looks that way. It says George's iPhone. So coming.
Were people we know on that?
Yes.
Oh,
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. I don't know about your class, but the class ahead of you, Fred, was replete with, I think they had something like 10 guys or something.
oh.
Is George there?
George has
Yeah,
got an
Hi,
icon
George.
here.
can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I
Good to
didn't
see
sign
you.
in with yeah, I have a blank face today.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, welcome, George.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know how long I can be here, but I thought I'd pop in. Our guest went into San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I can join in medias res, as they say.
Okay, well, we are just kind of reminiscing about all kinds of
Curiosity.
archdiocesan, seminarian stuff and all. I was about to say, Fred, I don't know if you might be interested in that book that Ted Howard put together. I actually scanned it. I was too cheap to buy it. So it was available online. He gave out the link, but I took a screenshot and edited it of each page and I put it together in a PDF book. I
Wow.
could send you a copy of that if you'd like to look through it as a stroll down memory lane.
I certainly would.
Yeah,
Well, send it to me too, Tom,
I'll
please.
send it to all of you.
That'd be great.
Yeah, because John,
yeah.
you've got the hard copy there.
I've got the hard copy, which
Yeah.
now sells for $278. Tim Elmy wanted to buy one,
Oh, okay.
but I'll link you to him. But I just opened up the page from the class of 60. That would be
Us.
they were 2 years ahead of us. So we graduated in 60, they graduated in 58. Mike Wimpy, Peter Garcia, and Al Ramos were the major
Oh, yeah.
offenders of that group. That was a sad, sad story.
But they were, Ramos was eventually investigated, et cetera. He was in the Diocese of Orange.
Moby, let's go.
And
Let's go. Come on, stay there.
And tomorrow a high of 72.
And anyway, the DAs had Ramos. He signed a declaration under penalty of perjury, admitting at least 25 different kids that he had molested. And if I recall, his molestation wasn't merely fondling, it involved penetration and rape or quasi-rape. So the Diocese of Orange, therefore, was instrumental through Mike Driscoll, and it was auxiliary. I don't know if he was an auxiliary at the time, though, in transferring Al to the Diocese of Tijuana, where he was placed in charge of an orphanage.
Oh, my gosh. Oh,
Yeah.
my.
Yeah. He wound up back in the States and died alone in was it a trailer park? I don't remember. But
It was a trailer park, yeah.
That's Eleuterio.
Is that George Ferrick's sound system?
No, that's not.
Oh,
Because I
George
muted
is-
George, and now I can't unmute him. George, if you can hear me, see if you can unmute yourself, because I could mute you, but I couldn't unmute.
Unmute.
I thought that was
there you go.
background. There we
Yeah.
go. Now we've got you. Okay.
No, I unmuted myself.
Somebody's got some background.
Yeah.
I had some
Well-
sirens here a few minutes ago. I muted myself for part of that. There's
Wait,
a lot
George
going
is
on in the neighborhood here.
George is muted again.
Yeah, the little symbol
Yeah,
has
yeah.
George
They didn't
Ferrick
do that, I
muted.
don't think.
Wimpy was rather spectacular in this respect too,
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
as was John Dawson.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I didn't,
Peter Garcia, not so much.
Now Peter Garcia quite so
Hank, I saw,
Hi, George. You're back.
yeah, I'm gonna have,
As part of my therapy for being such a slob, I was made a sacristan at the mission. Eleuterio, Ramos was there with me, working for the procurator who said mass there.
Father Trower.
Trower.
Yeah. So I'm starting to realize why I didn't get along too well with him.
I remember one year Ramos stayed at Queen of Angels during the summer. And none of us could figure it out. Ramos, why would you stay at the seminary during the summer? And just speculating, looking backwards, I'll bet he had confided in some priest or priest that he himself was a victim of this type of thing, and they gave him refuge there to avoid it.
Wow.
I'll bet. I have no idea.
Or maybe one of the priests, faculty took a liking to him and engineered his staying to.
We would make a great detective agency because I would investigate whether it was a dysfunctional household that he didn't want to go home to.
Well, that was always what I found out about him. That was my guess.
Uh-huh.
But it could be Tom's theory too, that Father, the other Father Danaher was having a ball with Ramos, who knows?
Well, those aren't mutually exclusive either.
No, they aren't. Oh, dear Jesus.
Yeah, it definitely, it's sobering.
Can I jump in with another topic? I sent an email to the Bishop of Sacramento, and we had a hard time last week. I don't know if we remembered. It was Jaime Soto.
Yeah, we do.
and Sokol and his wife were close to him at one point. So I just sent an email to Soto asking him to extend invitation. Fred, Soto is about to reinstate the group that they had for men who had left the priesthood. And Sokol was part of that, and Leslie was part of that for a number of years. So Jaime Soto has done some good work in keeping those good people connected.
What a wonderful thing.
Very good.
He's a good guy. He's a progressive bishop, sure. I have a theological question for Fred and Tom. There was some correspondence back and forth about what is the Eucharist. Is it a meal? Is it a banquet? I guess those are synonyms. Or is it, Holy Communion as we grew up with it? And the question occurred to me was, looking upon the Eucharist as a meal or a banquet, what is it that we eat at that banquet or meal? Question mark.
Okay. Oddly enough, because I sort of followed the discussion,
Yeah, and sent your paper.
so I've been thinking about this. And I thought I was inspired really to write my paper because of Tom's contribution to the discussion, because he was pretty clear about his idea of the real presence,
Mhm.
and I thought his alternative way of thinking about the thing was so much more like the mode I had adopted of
Mhm.
celebrating the Eucharist with whatever community I celebrated it with. And I don't know whether you had a chance to look at it.
I did, yes.
Yeah,
And
I didn't.
Fred, I
missed it.
looked at it. I did not read it with any depth. But I do want to go back to it and maybe,
Well, let me defer that question. I would imagine when Berryman shows up to grace us with his presence, he may very well have some thoughts.
mhm.
No, I missed that, Fred. I'll go back and find it.
No worries.
Yeah, part of our
The only
problem
thing
is we get these multiple email threads that go on. It's hard to, I'm not sure how we could make that communication more efficient, but it's sometimes hard to find something in multiple, replies that, yeah, somebody said this somewhere buried in those 27 messages there.
the secret is to save them as PDFs when we get them, I think.
and then put them in files that serve each one of our purposes.
Ah, that may be a good idea. I hadn't really.
But the only thing I read or saw read was George Ferrick's friend, whose name I can't think of, but he was at the North American College. Was he from New Orleans? I don't remember the guy's name, but
Oh, Martos?
yeah,
Joe Martos, yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Very insightful, huh?
Yeah.
Well, but why is it absurd to, why is the notion that Jesus could be physically present in the host. Why is that absurd? I mean, Jesus being, I mean, if you take the logic of the church, Jesus being God, he pretty much do anything he wants, right? I mean, why couldn't he do that? I'm not saying I think he did or didn't.
Oh,
My
no,
view has always been, I'm not going to argue with anybody about molecules. That's kind of my, but why not? Why couldn't he?
oh, there's no reason why he couldn't. I agree with that. But I had a different take on it. A lot of it had to do with a thing I've been kind of working out of how the church, especially the post-Reformation church, the church on the defensive against modernism, and so forth, got into its own form of what I would call fundamentalism.
Mhm.
And and so the overwhelming emphasis on holding things as true, which there's something noble about that idea that you're going to live by what you hold as true. And if you were brought up to think that, which basically is the idea that you're a Christian not because the church works, but because it's true. There's some sense in which that's absolutely the case. But there is a way in which the doctrine could be taught um, in a totally, not in the world of theory, but it's in the world of common sense, which reduces theory to a certain horizon. And the horizon would involve a basic difficulty in cognitional theory. And cognitional theory is asking and answering the question, what are we doing when we think we're knowing? And most of us aren't inclined to ask that question. And one of the reasons why in a system which we would have had, in other words, exposure to philosophy, is that we basically taught metaphysics and epistemology. And those things don't work unless they're critically grounded in a right way of thinking about knowledge. And most people never ask that question, what am I doing when I think I'm knowing? And as a result, insofar as they really care about the truth, they become naive realists. And the basic way they become naive realists is to think about knowing the truth, knowing reality, as somehow analogous to taking a good look at things. So they start with the problem of epistemology, which replaced metaphysics as first philosophy at the time of the scientific revolution. So metaphysics was a total and basic science. And in Aristotle's system, all the other divisions of science, episteme, knowing things by their causes, in a way that's universal, certain, and necessary, sets the basic terms and relations for all the other sciences, physics, biology, things. So physics is being. That's what metaphysics is about. It's being that moves. And then you have things that grow, that are alive. And those are things that grow themselves. But each one of these things is beings. And the way they treated the science was in the light of the metaphysics of being, which people rarely really appropriate except by memory. And so you go on up to human psychology and then finally natural theology about God, all based on Aristotelian metaphysics. And that seemed to be the key to Thomas Aquinas's way of thinking about things. Except, and that's the way the neo-scholastic philosophical manuals considered it. And that was a big problem for me, as I said in this paper, which you can read sometime. I remember when we had one of these manuals written by a French Canadian guy, and when it came to the problem of knowledge, they definitely start with what you might call the problem of the bridge. And the premise of the problem of the bridge is the subject has a mind and reality is outside the subject. So you've got subjective and objective. And the problem is the bridge. How does the subject get out to the really real and bring it back in such a way that you know it's really real? And if you use the ocular analogy, it's something like the thing you're sure you do when you know is look. And so when you were a little kid and your big brother told you there's a wolf in your closet, you would say, oh no, as a real little kid. But after a while, you found out that if you looked in your closet and didn't see a wolf, well, then there's no wolf. And that's your criterion for reality. You don't see the air. Of course, you do in LA with all the smog.
It's not as bad as you remember.
Yeah, I think that's true. But if you tell a person to wave their hand fast, they realize, oh, I can feel air, so it must be real. So the real is already out there now real, and the way you get already out there is through your senses. Meanwhile, your mind, from that point of view, since it's just a matter of epistemology rather than cognitional theory, is a black box. So you've got the sensations coming in, and then according to the neo-scholastic way of thinking about what happens is that unconsciously, your mind abstracts everything particular and concrete from what comes in, and it gives you abstract concepts. So I remember a lot of guys in my class were puzzled by that when we had it in philosophy. And they'd say, oh yeah, that makes sense. You see different kinds of trees, or you look at different kinds of fruit, and you have an orange and an apple, a lemon, and so forth and so on. And you realize, well, they're all fruit. So fruit is the nature of all these different varieties of kinds of subspecies, different accidents, making them different fruits. So, and I remember the one that was used most frequently was tree. Well, we use the word tree and we know exactly what we mean. And we don't suppose that we don't know what a tree is. And so we think, well, yeah, that makes sense that you see all kinds of trees and somehow or other you learn that there's this common thing to all the trees, which is like treeness. This is a thing that's in common, the abstract. But what they think is, so since impressions come in, then unconsciously the mind comes up with universal concepts. Uh, and 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 so we talk, when we talk to each other, we use universal concepts. So we don't really have any doubts about that. We know all kinds of things. We can see them, we can smell them, we can touch them, and we can generalize. Uh, and we don't really generalize, because the way we learn about trees and so forth is for when we came to learn our mother tongue. Um, and that's what I'm trying to emphasize. We get talked into talk by those who talk at us.
Can I just
Yeah, please,
can
anytime.
interject a little bit here, because the difficulty that I'm seeing behind what I'm hearing you say is that fundamentally the universal truth that is behind any of the concepts that we have of it is always going to be exponentially, if not infinitely, more than what our concept of it is. So our concepts are always going to be partial. They're always going to be limited. And I think there is one of the problems that we have had in the way that the church teaching is presented, is that it's presented as this is it, that's all there is. Whereas to say that this is an authentic grasp of what is, but what is infinitely beyond what this particular concept is grasping. Now, what I'm consciously trying to do is, I think I'm trying to echo in terms that I understand what you have been saying, Fred.
I see, good.
You know, in other words, there's such a thing as universal truth, but we can never adequately express universal truth in any limited concept or expression of particular truths. There's always going to be something beyond that. And where we run into problems, and I think where we run into heresy, you know, my own view of heresy, as I've understood it throughout the history of the church and other institutions that decide to, you know, declare certain things heretical, it's heresy isn't found in what people affirm, it's found in what people deny. When they make a particular apprehension of truth exclusive, that excludes any broader understanding. And I'm not going to say that there are not things that aren't, you know, fundamentally wrong. I think definitely there are. But most of what we are talking about when we talk about heresy and argue fine points of doctrine tend to be, well, my view is exclusive. No, my view is exclusive. It doesn't even attempt to integrate your view. And that kind of means both views are wrong because they're not wrong in what they affirm, but they're wrong in their exclusivity. Now, does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense.
It sure does for me,
I don't-
because I spent so much time with adult faith formation and realizing, and this is where Thomas Merton and Richard Rohr were a big help to me. At a certain level, each one of us has progressed in our spirituality, in our perception of our spiritual life. So when we talk about the Eucharist, I'm ready to accept the real presence in a way that someone who's never really had a spiritual life, a prayer life, would not have. And Richard Rohr makes a good case for 6 or 7 stages of
Mhm.
spiritual development. And I'm just thinking each one of those is like a filter, almost like the glasses that I wear at this stage in my spiritual journey. And that perception, just like what you said, Tom, for me to deny someone else to have a different perception
Yeah.
is denying their place in their spiritual life.
But what we might, but what I think we should do then is have some dialogue to try to understand, are there things in your own perception that can square with my perceptions? Are we coming from different expressions of the same basic principles? That's
That's where Fred's paper, I think, is significant help.
yeah.
Well, I alas haven't read it yet, but
What you're,
Tom,
go ahead.
how would your views affect a discussion about treeness? In other words, is there such a thing, at least in the abstract, as treeness? I mean, is there an objective reality there that trees are?
Well, that's complicated, I think.
It's complicated. It's interesting. While you're talking, I'm looking at a tree. I think it's a magnolia. I'm not sure. It's got a couple of blossoms on it. It's across the street from here in the parkway. And I'm just, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. There's a couple of palm trees. And then in Palos Verdes, there's a whole bunch of trees up there, including a row of eucalyptus that frames a hiking trail up there that treeness in some ways I think is only conceptual. These are things that grow according to the biological processes, each one having its own unique individual way of doing it. What do they hold in common?
I don't know. We know it when we see it.
We know it when we see it. Yeah.
There is a problem that the kind example of treeness really has to do with things we know in relation to our language and our common sense, the culture
Yes.
we call trees. But that, I don't know whether you had a chance to read the Rosenberg's article about Percy, Walker Percy.
No, I got some catching up to do here. I don't know how I missed that.
Well, somehow or other, I got it from George. He did scan it and send it.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I remember.
And it talks about the wonderful upbringing that Percy got to experience due to the early death of his father, that his uncle adopted not only him and his brothers, but also Shelby Foote, a great historian,
Oh,
especially of the Civil War period.
uh-huh.
And their father was an amazing, wonderful father and example of what it meant to be human. Um, but what happened was the integrity of his father was at first appropriated by Walker Percy about cutting down the BS quotient in life, which is a great thing to do, to be.
Mhm.
And he thought the way to do it then was through science, because science not only tries to understand things, like, for example, take Newton's optics, where we learn about light, and we learn that that light involves a spectrum, and that there's a way of thinking about the refraction of light, which is verifiable,
Mm-hmm.
which can be formulated in an explanatory way that's verifiable. And that's moving from things in relation to ourselves to things among each other. So what um, what Tom was saying really has to do with he didn't acknowledge it too much, but he practiced it. He talked about using a concept to cover a lot of stuff, but there's much more to it than just the concept.
Mhm.
Really, what a concept for Thomas Aquinas was not a word, which we always learn from the scholastics, but it was a definition. So a definition is the expression of the intelligibility of a thing into which you've had an insight. And and we spend an awful lot of our time not really having questions and insights, but we learn from our learning a mother tongue about basically like Helen Keller. Did you ever see that movie, The Miracle Worker?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
No, I've never seen it. I know her story well, but I haven't seen the movie.
It doesn't matter, but if you know her story well, you know the point.
Mm-hmm.
Here is a blind, deaf mute
Yes.
who can only be communicated with through some kind of symbolism which her nurse decided to use on her hand. And so the example she focuses on is nurse Ann Sullivan going out to, in the days when people went out to the pump to wash up in the morning, that while the water was coming down on her hand, she would spell out something on her hand. And she'd do that and do that. And then all of a sudden, Helen Keller had an insight. And the way she expresses it in the story of my life is that the sign had a denotation. It had a meaning. It referred to something outside of itself. And that made her realize that there is such a thing as language. And she began to appropriate language, even as a blind person. And she got concerned with that and had to do with the invention of Braille and so forth. So the point is that we do that when we do something similar when we're little kids. And we learn to speak. We figure out what's the right thing to say by people talking to us, and then we try to say it back. And by their reaction to us, we can see whether we made sense or not.
Mhm.
And we gradually build up a vocabulary that the people in our linguistic culture comprehend. But basically, so much of that stuff, as Tom said, is in the realm of common sense, like the relationship between the trees outside his window and his saying the different names of the trees and so forth and so on. And those are things in relation to us, but science moves from things in relation to us to things in relation to each other. So there's something true about what Tom said about what heresy means. It means that you're denying the truth of something and you're making a judgment. It's not true. So he kept saying, kept using judgments. Okay, thanks. My granddaughter.
Ah,
So he kept making a judgment about affirming and denying. Affirming and denying has to do with judgments. Is it so? Or is it not so? And that's distinct from understanding. And so that's an important distinction. So when
It
you
does-
understand, excuse me, John, go ahead.
That's all right.
When you understand something, you apprehend a possibly relevant term or set of terms and relations that mutually condition each other. But it's only possibly true. That's why science is important in the sense that it gives the example that, well, yeah, we have this problem. We think we understand what the solution to the problem is, but we have to test it and verify it. Because before we verify it, it's probably it's hypothetically true or possibly true, but we have to find out if it's true in the sense that there's sufficient evidence to support the truthfulness of our claim. So certainly lawyers like you and Ned, George, are used to this, that you have the whole thing of evidence.
Right.
And the idea for people that they have to have sufficient evidence in the sense that they can't really have a reasonable doubt about what the case really stands for. And so I can remember this, for example. So a judgment can be certain or reasonably certain in that sense, no reasonable doubt. And I was a jury, the head of in a jury trial, and I was the foreman of the jury. And we heard this interesting case, which was a civil case. In the civil case, as George could tell us, you don't need to prove it without a reasonable doubt. You just have to show that it's plausible, that it's probably the case. So that's a different kind of judgment.
Preponderance of evidence, as they say.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
we say, we 11 of us in the jury said, well, this is certainly, you can't deny that it probably happened. The evidence made that clear. But one of the jury members kept saying, yes, but you have to know without a reasonable doubt. She'd seen enough trial on TV to hear that phrase. You have to get beyond to the of hearsay and so forth and so on in order to find out what's without a reasonable doubt. So we came to the conclusion after about a half hour of discussion. But she said, no, it's not without a reasonable doubt. And it took us over an hour to try to teach her the distinction between what you need for a felony crime
Mhm.
or civil in that kind of a case as opposed to a civil case. And that was a hell of a trying time for the whole jury.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
And but
I've
at any
served on 5 juries. I'm very familiar with that.
rate, you get called
Both
all the
criminal
time.
and civil. But
Wow, Tom.
In the voir dire, I usually get eliminated.
Ah,
you know, I would even wear my clericals, and there was
and the
only
hope
once
to
that
be
I was-
dismissed.
that I was that one of the lawyers asked to have me removed, dismissed. Every other time, for whatever reason, I stayed on.
Oh, that's interesting.
They assumed you'd heard a lot of confessions.
Well, yeah, actually, in one case, I am very well aware that the I don't want to get too racially or ethnically tinged here, but the prosecutor was and this was a murder trial. The prosecutor was a youngish Cuban woman who wanted the judge to dismiss me, but would not take the initiative to have me dismissed because it might be bad luck for her.
Oh.
And the defense attorney was an older public defender who was American-born Irish, and you know, he said, "Well, you know, I have no problem with a priest on that. You're going to be more likely to be on my side than you are on the prosecution side," which was kind of true. We find actually on that one, the guy was guilty. I mean, there was no question that he was guilty. It was really a question of like first degree or second degree. He wasn't the one who pulled the trigger. He was the accomplice. And was there conspiracy, or was it, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So we gave him the lightest possible sentence.
So I think so. What judgment establishes is you have to marshal and weigh evidence.
Yeah.
To see if the evidence is sufficient to warrant a judgment, a certain kind of judgment, and the judgments basically break down to 3 kinds. First, certain, without a reasonable doubt. Second, probable. And third, only possible. But you're making judgments there. And the point of that is to say that understanding can be exact, but as the very thing that Walker Percy thought was going to be the key to his life, namely scientific truth, he probably did find out, I'm sure he did find out, that science never makes more than probable judgment. That's why they always say it's the best opinion we have now. But they all realize you could have another hypothesis that's more verifiable and more adequate to cover the case than this. See? So judgments are crucial.
Yeah, I'd like to pull this back to George's question about the Eucharist, and
Yeah.
obviously it's a meal.
Okay, so what I'm really trying to say in short, is the naive realist thinks in terms of the already out there now. And that's a way of really saying, well, if something is substantial, you can distinguish between the substance and the accidents.
Yeah.
And adopting Aristotelian terminology from a naive realist point of view, if you understand the substance, then that's what you're saying the miracle is about. You have the substance of Christ, which is a weird thing to say.
It is, it is.
If you know anything about the Council of Chalcedon, where there are two natures in one person, so it leaves out person to start with. But the other thing is, if you're taught this as true, as we always were, then you realize that, oh yeah, the priest drinks the wine and we only get the bread, but Jesus is present, really present in the host too, and really present in the wine too. And it's sort of an already out there now experience that you know you've received Jesus into yourself when you have communion, which is
Yeah.
really, there's nothing wrong with that, to think that. And I mean, that could be a very edifying
There's
event.
nothing wrong with it, but my big point is that is inadequate.
That's what I think too.
There's nothing wrong with it, but it's inadequate. Now, let's explore those.
Well, wait,
inadequacies. Let's explore-
Tom,
If
Tom,
it's
is
really
that,
present, fine, no problem. But there's a lot more that you can say after you say transubstantiation, however you might understand that. You know, it's pretty clear how you understand that philosophically. But
wait,
a lot
Tom,
more you can say. So let's get about the business of saying more.
are you saying that this naive realism notion that, okay, this is Jesus is fully present in the host, say, is true as far as it goes, but doesn't go that far? Is that what you're saying?
I think that's pretty much what I would say.
Yeah, I think
And if you hold to that naive realism as being the sum total of what we have to believe or understand, you've got a very, very restricted, constipated spirituality of the Eucharist going on there. That's
Okay.
my Jesus, that's all that's needed. And-
the other thing, excuse me, could I just add, that makes it basically a cognitional event, cognitive function of meaning.
Yeah,
But what the Eucharist
limits
is,
it to a cognitive function.
yeah, but
It
what
limits it to a constricted cognitive function even.
so my clue that changed my mind when I finally read Thomas Aquinas on the Eucharist was that he said the real effect, the res of this sacrament, is the unity of the mystical body of Christ.
Which is precisely what Paul said in 1 Corinthians.
Of course. That's of course.
And if you read the scriptures from today, the Feast of the Sacred Heart, that Jesus truly died, and they verified it in John's Gospel that out came water and blood. But after the resurrection on Sunday morning, everybody who saw Jesus, it didn't look like they knew him before. There was a change of substance. When I think transubstantiation, it's a change from the Jesus who died on the cross to the Jesus who was present on the road to Emmaus.
Yeah.
And is
See,
present.
I would modify that considerably. I
Okay.
would say not a change of substance, but a change of appearance. What Thomas and the scholastics and Aristotle would say accidents. You know, and accidents, if you're going to talk about substance and accidents, what everything that we could say about physicality, down to the molecules and the subatomic particles, would fall under the category of accidents, not the underlying substance. So is Jesus Christ physically present in the Eucharist? That is a bad question, because what that does is it makes looking at the host, you are looking at Jesus as he is physically present. No, you're not. You're looking at a piece of bread. Now, the
Okay,
substance of
okay.
that piece of bread, however we might want to categorize it or whatever, something there is not breadness, it is Jesusness or Christness. Now, if we try, and here's something that I'm becoming more and more convinced of, if we try to explain that further in exclusive categories, we're probably going to get into trouble denying stuff that we should be accepting. It's a little bit like lawmaking and sausage making. You know, you can appreciate it much more if you don't inquire too closely into the exact how it happened. And to me, one of the fascinating things is, for half of the church's life, no Christian ever bothered to look too closely into the how of the real presence. They just said he is really present there. Don't ask too many questions. He's there. That's all you need to know. That's all we need to know. And as Thomas affirmed, he is there because he is there in relation, in the bread and wine. Okay, he is there only because he is in relationship to his being here among the members of his body. There is an inseparable relationship there, which is what Thomas would say about the res of the sacrament. So the connection is, and this is the beauty, I think, of that four modes of Christ's presence in the Vatican Council defined or articulated. That the real presence in the bread and wine of the Eucharist is inseparable from take and eat, take and drink, do this in memory of me. And unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you do not have life in you. And he who eats the bread and the wine, takes part in this meal without recognizing the body being the church, the community.
Mystical body, yeah.
The body. Mystical adds a kind of a wishy-washy concept, at least in my estimation.
I hear.
It's not real, it's mystical,
Okay.
Getting new agey there.
See, I'm okay with both ends.
Yeah.
So many are not.
Yeah, well,
With both ends.
mystical properly understood, yes, but mystical tends to, like symbolic, so
Cloud.
tends to sound like it is opposed to real. And see, that's the problem that Barron has. The Eucharist is a symbol, an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. It is a symbol. Merely a symbol, that's where we get into trouble.
Yeah.
But it is a symbol. Now let's explore what being a symbol means. It means, first of all, containing in some way within itself the reality that it's expressing. So the real presence of Christ is somehow contained within the breadness that is transformed into the Christness, shall we say. So, you can accept all of that, but you can't separate it from the relationship with as the sacrificial meal that nourishes the body of Christ. So that's where my theology would center on. Therefore, the more complete you can make the symbol, the closer you are to really appreciating what the real presence actually means and does in your own life and in our church, our community, and in our world, our relationship with one another. So
So in other words, it's not either cognitive or effective meaning, but it's communicative meaning.
if you need to categorize those various degrees of meaning, I guess so. I'm really not familiar with that categorization.
Well,
And
that's
let's face
okay.
it, what you're saying, Fred, is you're categorizing varying kinds of meaning.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
But we,
Is the reality even beyond the categorization of it?
yes, it's a reality, but the key thing is it has to do with constitutive meaning. Our lives are constituted by meaning and value, usually based on belief. But it's that constitutive function of meaning that's at the basis of, so what you're talking about when you talk about the reality of the body,
Mhm,
meaning the whole Christ,
mhm.
um, that's constitutive.
Yeah.
And but there was a certain sense in which the notion of going to communion, as we used to call it, was you go as an individual and you get this special gift, which is the actual physical presence of Christ in you. And like all the other food, when it's digested, it moves in every part of your body in some sense, like food does.
Yeah.
And there's a way in which that's not a bad way to think, but it's the wrong way to think because it's
I
too
would say
limited.
inadequate way to think.
Yeah, me too.
That's what I would say.
Yeah,
Inadequate.
Inadequate. Yeah.
That's a better way to put it.
Yeah. In
That's
other
a-
words,
Tom,
it is that, but that's not all there is.
and Tom, I think as a priest, you had an opportunity to acknowledge what we just talked about, that a communicant receives the body, goes back and absorbs into self. But if you jump up and run out of the church, you've done a disservice to the body, because we will be dismissed as a community, the body. And that's where I heard some very good homilies about that and why we have a devotion when we receive communion, but it's more.
Yeah.
And I think
To be
you
really
put good words
honest,
to it.
one reason why I kind of affirm, but I'm also skeptical of Eucharistic adoration.
There you
Because
go.
it's a very secondary thing. If Jesus Christ is true God as well as truly human, and if Jesus Christ is truly present there in the Eucharistic elements, which I believe that he is, the real presence in some way, yes, you can adore him. It is legitimate to adore him there. But it's just as legitimate to adore him looking out my window too. But the spirituality of Eucharistic adoration tends to individualize it.
Yes, it absolutely
Jesus
does.
up there, physically present in that in that host, in that elegant monstrance, and of course, if we use I'm getting silly here. If we use the large host, well, there's just that much more Jesus there for me to than if we use a small host. Well, Yeah, that gets, it does begin, you take it too far, it begins to get into silliness.
Yeah.
I take it that, Tom, you are not enthusiastic, or you weren't in a parish when you were assigned to preside over benediction of the Blessed Sacrament.
Not one of my favorite things.
Yeah.
I did it, I can see the meaning to it and all of that, and I think it's authentic with spirituality, but so very often it sometimes becomes a replacement or a substitute
For,
for actual meaningfully celebrating the Eucharist. Or as I tell people, Jesus didn't say, take this and adore it, this is my body. He said, take this and eat it. So he immediately defined the action that should be done to this, however you understand that real presence, however you understand. I'm getting into quoting a certain former president here. Whatever is means there. What does
Yeah.
is mean?
we got to do this again when Shavira is here.
Yeah, whatever. But
do read my thing, because
I will.
yeah,
It's-
I'm gonna get more deeply into it.
it's really an extension of what Tom is getting at.
Yeah,
the-
I will be ready for this discussion next week. I don't know how I missed that stuff, but I did. So,
Do we want to bring Phil Berryman into it next week?
I don't know. And maybe he's a repeat guest because he's got so much to contribute about the church in Latin America and immigration and liberation theology. I mean, he's a world-class authority on this stuff.
Mhm.
Yes.
I don't want to distract it with the Eucharist, at least not initially.
Yeah.
Well,
shall we continue with our? If Eric and Shavira join us, that'll be 6.
Yeah, we'll live. I don't want to let go of the notion that when I go to communion, the God of all things somehow becomes part of the very marrow of my bones. And so much is his love for mankind. But it sounds like maybe I should.
No, why? There's nothing that you said in there that I think is exclusive of a broader Eucharistic theology.
Another both and.
God of all
please.
things is becoming the marrow of your bones. It's making you more like himself, and in making you more like himself, if God is love, and if the quality of God's love is self-emptying on behalf of the other, which is the meaning of the Trinity in my humble estimation, God is making you more self-emptying, not more exclusively Jesus and me.
Yeah, well, I get that Jesus and me theology or piety is a bad thing, but I
Maybe not just a bad thing, George, just a less mature spirituality, a step along the way.
Well,
but if you stay in that step along the way and cling to it, then that becomes a bad thing.
Yes.
me and my Jesus piety, I don't think it works. I mean, it's not like, what about the rest of creation? And et cetera. I mean, I think we would all fundamentally
Especially
agree
about,
that.
especially what about that annoying person who is sitting next to you in the pew?
You know what freaks me occasionally? It doesn't freak me, but the most predictive factor and predicting how any American citizen is going to vote, whether that person is going to vote for Trump or not, is how often does that person go to church? So I make it a practice to try to go to daily mass. Holy cow, I'm there. I mean, everybody there except me is a Trump supporter, right, Tom? Statistically. No,
Statistically,
it's not true, of course, but
it would
well,
seem perhaps so.
yeah. And so what does one do with that? Well, this is the mystical body of Jesus. It includes Trump supporters,
Well, it does.
and it was me and my
Included
Jesus that
Simon the
made me
Zealot.
think of that. Huh?
The apostles included Simon the Zealot
Well, they included Judas Iscariot.
and Judas the thief and traitor
Yeah.
and Peter.
I don't have any problem with Trump supporters as people. I really don't. I could even talk to them. So many, quote, liberals. I mean, I had former partners who said, well, I retire. I'm never going to live in anywhere near a red state. Well, something's wrong with that, Tim
Yeah.
Almy. Tim Almy. Do you remember Tim Almy, Fred?
I remember the name. I can't remember.
He was only with us for high school.
Yeah, John gave him my number, and Tim and I talked for an hour yesterday. And he lives in Asheville, North Carolina. And he was telling me about his travails with the local clergy, thundering from the pulpit that you're going to go to hell if you vote for Biden, and his fellow Catholics, and the passive bishop, but I think I could handle that. I think.
Mhm.
Not without a reasonable doubt, right?
Yeah, I would say I have a reasonable doubt, but I mean, I don't get, for many years now, I don't get upset with people that disagree with me, even if I think they're holding absurdities. So,
Mhm.
we're all full of shit in the long run, so to speak. Right, Fred? That's an aphorism. You heard of
But
it.
it's a passing thing.
We're also full of the Trinity.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jesus
Thank you.
sends, because of his life, death, and resurrection, Jesus sends the Spirit into everyone. It's a gift to the whole world. It doesn't matter what time they live, before or after the life of Christ. Everyone, that's the teaching of the church now. God's universal and unrestricted love for human beings, no matter what shape or how full of shit they are. And so if you say if the Spirit is sent to us, don't forget it's spirit, unconditioned by space and time. Does the Spirit come alone, or do Jesus and the Father are they also indwelling us?
Mhm.
Theologically, you have to say they are.
Well, certainly what Jesus says in the Last Supper discourse.
So Karl Rahner said that most Catholics are binitarians, Father and Son, period. But
Guilty.
in fact,
Mhm.
the capacity to believe, to want to believe the right thing, is really an urging of the Spirit in us. And you go with the light that you have. And people like Fallon were scandalized by so much that the church said and did. And he tried not to be a hypocrite. And he wasn't a hypocrite. And
Tom Welbers, thank you for that clarification of the definition of hypocrite.
Oh,
that was great. That was wonderful. So, so I think that's to be remembered,
Yeah,
that it's not as if you only are in Christ Jesus or Jesus in you because of taking communion. The point is that we tend to be selfish and self-centered rather than realizing that our basic nature is to be part of the whole Christ, which is the totality of humanity with Christ as its head. And that's the center of the Thomistic understanding of the Eucharist, the main point of the whole thing, and not how far into the marrow you're.
Mhm.
on that note, can
Good.
we say goodbye? Because I think that, Fred, you have just sort of summed up the whole of the reality that
well, yes,
That-
agreed.
is, that we're dancing around.
And I have some reading to do.
We all have a little work and reading to do, and I will share the recording of this with all of you and with George, Eric, and Ned, so they can get up to speed as they want to. And thank God for the fact that you can on YouTube, you can replay it at double speed so that you're catching almost everything without having all the pregnant pauses and the ums and
Good. And then maybe in the next 2 or 3 or 4 days, we'll get more clarity about our agenda for next week. A
Sounds
week
good.
from today.
sounds good.
Yeah, we can always catch up with this conversation.
Yes, we can,
And,
as we will with Ralph Platts too.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just, I'm so looking forward to Berryman. You know, he's been, I haven't seen him since, oh gosh, 1964.
I get to be in rather close contact with him because he comes to the Lonergan workshop.
Mhm.
His daughter lives in Cambridge here, so he comes to visit her and he often contacts me.
Well, he's been a hero of mine probably since I was a sophomore in high school. I don't know.
That was
He just had.
that was a scandalous thing for me, that he, although it turned out to be God's will that he go to Panama and El Salvador and so forth, but that they wouldn't accept the fact that he had some kind of concern with Cesar Chavez,
Oh,
Mhm.
etc., and the grape strike and so forth.
That was McIntyre.
Yeah,
Through and through.
through and through. Okay, here we go. Thank you.
blessing.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone, and I'm
Thanks.
pushing the end button now. Take care.
Okay.
God bless.